All right, so we'll begin our discussion on the history of Christendom. I'm not quite sure if we'll hit that target.
That was the plan.
But that was the plan. I might have screwed it up. But no, I think
first real episode.
I know it's not our first. Yeah, as I was putting this together, I really thought, this is setting the foundation for what we want to do. I say for this next year, next kind of school year, 2020 and 2021. But it is, right, the Christian culture, because obviously that's the lens that we're going to be viewing things through as we look at these different issues over the next few months and talk about things. Saw this book, was recommended. This is by Tim Holland. It's called Vineyard. Full disclosure, I'm in the process of reading it.
How far are you?
Okay, maybe not full disclosure.
Partial disclosure.
Partial disclosure. So there are a lot of great interviews with Tim Holland. He's an English gentleman. We will link. There's a great podcast called Unbelievable. Tim Holland and A.C. Grayling. A.C. Grayling is a well-renowned European scholar, philosopher, historian as well, just like Tim Holland. But he's obviously more on the atheistic, humanistic side of things. It's a very good discussion. Nobody's yelling over the other person. It's actually a very good sharing of ideas.
Which the whole idea of that is very intriguing, and I think probably worth, I don't remember what our schedule is like, but just the willingness to engage with someone that you don't agree with on some things.
Yeah.
And both of you know that, and yet you can have a meaningful, respectful conversation. There's probably some things to learn from that.
Yeah.
And so the thesis of his book, as you can maybe see here from the cover, is this idea, right? How do you have this itinerant preacher from Nazareth,
right.
Nothing good comes from Nazareth, right, as the scriptures say, be crucified, which was a criminal's death. I mean, it was even below a criminal, the lowest of low, that you save that for, those that were rebellious or treasonous. How does this man, and obviously we believe him to be the Son of God too, but how do you go from that to the idea of really this idea of Christian thought, Christian practices, virtues, all of these things? How does that just continue to permeate our culture 2,000 years later? And as Tim Holland argues, is there's really in every aspect of our culture, whether you're Christian or not.
Yeah.
There's ways that you think, there's ways that you behave that are innately Christian, whether you realize it or not, whether you would even agree with it or not.
Right.
And so I want to just talk about some of those things. I have down here a list, and so we'll just kind of work our way through this. But I think even just in our more immediate American history, and I always hear people say, well, America's not a Christian nation, and I usually know what people mean when they say that. Yes, this nation was not founded
as a theocracy.
As a theocracy, thank you. But yet, the vast majority of the guys that founded this country were Bible-believing,
Held Christian values.
Held Christian values, exactly, right? They weren't Buddhist. They weren't Muslim. They weren't, whatever. So, it's probably not really till the 50s or 60s, right, where I think you see an influx of other cultures, whether through the university, through music. I mean, look at the Beatles. Look at obviously, there's a drug revolution. There's a sexual revolution, right? There's all these things that really kind of open up, maybe for lack of a better word, the soul, right, of America to start incorporating different ideas. And here we are, right? You and I are the kids of people that grew up during that time.
Yeah.
So we're still not very far removed from that. One of the things, and obviously being pastors, maybe we are just probably on the front lines of this a little bit more, but I look at the idea of funerals, and it's always interesting sitting down with a family, especially maybe somebody who wasn't super religious or maybe never had a salvation experience, but people still want a Christian funeral, though. It's kind of a funny Or you'll get the other way, right? Where grandma loved Jesus, and I've had children go, well, I don't want this to be an overtly Christian funeral. Well, what do you mean by that, right? Well, I don't want it to be hellfire and brimstone. Well, okay. So you don't want to feel guilty because you know you're not living the way you should be. But what I find interesting, I always find probably the internment the most interesting thing, right? Because that's where we see, I think, the culture and these beliefs come to play, right? Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Well, that's a Judeo-Christian belief, right? We believe that God formed Adam out of the dust of the earth, right? That he breathed into him life. And, there's a reason why gosh, I can't think. Joseph, right? Joseph says, hey, when we get ready to leave Egypt, make sure you take my bones out of here, right? There was something about that,
One of the things I think is interesting, though, when you think about that is, and how our culture is changing, right? And really now in this post Christian culture or post Christendom, how we deal with death is one of the ways where you can see the rejection of Judeo-Christian values. Because we aren't doing, more and more often, we're not doing funerals the same way anymore. We're not doing interments the same way. One of the things that's becoming very popular right now are these pods you're buried in with seeds, and then a tree grows out of the pod, which is green and all of those things. But it also, that isn't the whole nature of that isn't birthed out of a Judeo-Christian. It's birthed out of an Eastern reincarnation. Even the idea of cremation. I couldn't think of the word. It's economical and it all does is speed of natural process. But the way we often practice it, right, with the spreading of ashes in places that people loved, again, is not birthed out of a Judeo-Christian perspective. Yeah. It's birthed out of an Eastern thought. Again, reincarnation and going back into the hope. Your hope in death is becoming a part of the world, what we call creation, in a new way. So, when I think of how our world is rejecting Christendom at this point, some of the most practical ways that we see Christendom are some of the ways it's being rejected. And we don't even realize it most of the time. We can go, oh, yeah, cremation, it's a whole heck of a lot cheaper. Way cheaper. You don't have, and I don't mean to be critical. It's just, we don't even think about the implications to some of those subversive changes in culture.
So here was one of the stories I want to share. It's kind of funny, maybe only to preachers. I don't know. We have a different sense of humor, I guess. But when I was at the last church I was at, we were really close to the Canadian border. There was a family that had a loved one that had passed. They had been cremated. But the cemetery was over on the Canadian side. We lived St. Clair River, like little town of Algonac. And my senior minister didn't have his passport, so he couldn't cross over the river to go do this funeral. And internment, whatever it was. And so I had my passport. And it was, I think it was this guy's like brother and sister-in-law or something. And there was whoever the official needed to be there to make sure that it got buried right. So there's like 4 of us there. And, so I say a few words, read a passage, whatever, have a prayer. And the sister-in-law, whoever it was, that she was standing there. Maybe it shouldn't be funny. I don't know. So they put the box down on the ground, the hole's there, and she has 4 roses. And so she, again, feeling, right, some sort of Christian something, right? There's got to be some right words to say, something right to do, I don't know. So she takes 1 rose for the Father, and she puts it, and for the Son. And, she's starting to cry more and more. I'm a horrible person. I don't know, whatever. You guys can judge me however you want. Leave a nasty comment in the comments. She puts the 3rd one in for the Holy Spirit, and she's got the 4th one, and she doesn't know what to do with the 4th rose now, and she finally just throws it in there. But to me, right, it just kind of encapsulates that, right? Like, I know this is kind of the right thing to do or the right words to say, but I have zero connection to it, right? And it is. I think as we unfortunately probably are moving into more of a post-Christendom culture. I mean, to me, that just encapsulated it so perfectly, right? You're like, I know there's this Trinity thing. I have, whether she probably not even use that word, right? But I know the Father, I know the Son, I know the Holy Spirit.
I've heard of those three,
and I don't know what to do with the fourth rose.
Extra flower.
So it just.
Part of what we're wanting to do here for this episode is talk about where we've come from.
Yeah.
How things are shifting in our current culture, and how do we, based on, because you can't erase or forget history.
Yeah.
There's lots of conversations on that right now. Not even talking about the church or Christianity. But how do we, understanding where we've come from, how do we speak into a world that has changed?
Yeah.
And is continually changed. And this is the same thing that Jesus wrestled with as he showed up in the first century of a world that was changing, in large part because of the occupation that the Israelites found themselves in yet again.
Yep.
And the world was changing, and it was becoming bigger because the Roman Empire is still the greatest empire that largely, I don't know if the English Empire covered more square miles, but at that time, certainly, the superpower of the world.
They still have roads that exist 2,000 years later.
Yeah.
Right.
Come on, Michigan. Get with it. Okay.
Sorry. Moving on.
But the same thing, right? You brought in a bigger network,
Yes.
right, of ideas, of cultures, of philosophies, all of those things. So then I think the other part too, where we see some of this Christendom. So funerals is kind of that one special occasion or ceremony. The other is weddings and even just marriage. And so again, from a pastor's perspective, right, it's interesting to sit down with people and say, well, I don't really want a Christian wedding. And you're like, what do you think?
Then
What do you think we're doing?
Right.
Yeah, right, exactly. Right? Then go have the judge, and I mean, I did a wedding here not too long ago where, and I told them, and I tell this to everyone, I said, look, I'm pretty flexible. We can do kind of any sort of ceremony you want to do, and again, in my mindset, I mean that with like, you want to do a sand ceremony or a unity candle or communion or not communion, or if you want a foot wash or not, I mean, what we can do. And it was like a week before the wedding, and she sends me back the outline, and there's like all the Christian stuff is like taken out of it, and it's like, so this is like some sort of pagan, right? Again, right? It's just some sort of druidic. I love you, you love me.
And our love's going to be enough forever.
Yeah, it's not.
I was at a wedding one time. For a friend of mine, and they had written their own vows, and again, it was devoid of all of that stuff. And I promised to make you happy every day of my life, and all this. And
good luck with
my
that.
wife and Allison and I had been married for a few years by that point. I looked, they don't know what they're saying right now. But again, when you divorce the Christian faith from those things, right? What is the Christian faith built upon? Mutual sacrifice, right? Elevating others above yourself. Love for those that aren't deserving of love. All of those things, right? The Christian wedding has those pieces built into it, right? The vows are oriented around those things. In sickness and in health, for better, for worse. That's not the same thing as I promise to make you happy all the days of my life, right?
Right.
I mean, and so when we begin to separate those Judeo-Christian values from these moments that have become so culturally significant, they lose the oomph behind them. And they do. They become just some kind of pagan ceremony, which is fine. For folks who aren't
Christian
in the church.
Yeah.
Actually, it might be a healthy thing because for some reason, weddings has become an area where the church is, as a pastor, when you officiate a wedding, you're acting as an officer of the state.
Sure.
And that's a responsibility that was never ours to begin with. And I don't think we were really thinking clearly when we agreed.
Yeah, however that happened. Yeah, however that happened. Well, and that's what, I'm not going to get off. No, sorry. Just, but I mean, again, we talk a lot about this is we're talking about Christendom too, but again, this idea of a Judeo-Christian ethic, so that we do see with Adam and Eve, right, that there was something that those two, and what I always like about Genesis 1 as it transitions into Genesis 2 is that it's this idea that male and female are the reflected image of God.
Yeah.
And this is, you know, we're going to get people are going to get unsubscribed. This won't get monetized. Next thing I say here, but you know, to me, that's part of the reason why homosexuality doesn't work. Two men are not a reflection of God's image. Two women are not a reflection of God's image. Right? It is a man and a woman. There is something about that. And again, so the same thing we talked about this earlier. People say, well, biblical marriage. Well, we look in the Old Testament. There's a lot of guys that had 3, 4, 5 wives.
Yeah.
None of those stories went well either.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
There was dysfunction there, right? Because what does Jesus say in the New Testament? If you can't serve two masters, right? You're going to love one and hate the other. And invariably, I mean, that's what we see, right? As we see these men, they have one wife that's the favorite, the others that aren't. There's a reason that you are pledged yourself to one woman.
Yeah. One of the, not that we've ever watched this show faithfully, but have seen different times, you know, Sister Wives on TLC. Right, the show about the polygamous family, and that's what in their little opening montage thing. It makes we believe that love is something to be shared, not divided. Meaning, you know, picking and choosing that one person to give your love to versus having. And so it sounds very poetic, and it sounds very, again, self-sacrificing. I'm going to make room for in my relationship for others to be a part of it, and it's this self-sacrificing kind of thing. Which maybe sounds nice, but when you watch, and it's reality television, whatever, but when you watch how that plays out on the day-to-day, there's a lot of backbiting, there's a lot of jealousy, there's a lot of manipulation, there's a lot, and so you look at it and go, so how's that working out for you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You know, it just... It didn't work out in Scripture.
To me too, right? I mean, even the New Testament, right? The picture is of the church being the bride, of Christ being the groom, right? And how there is a perfect union there between those two that bring completeness, that bring fullness. One of the things that was interesting, Tom Holland said that in the Roman world, you know, and I don't want to get too graphic here or anything, but there was only one word for urinate and ejaculate. It was the same word. Right, there was no distinction, and in the Roman world, as the man of the house, right, as the master, you had the right to do either of those things to anybody within your household. It didn't matter. And so again, that Christian ethic then brings into, no, you have a wife. She is there for that purpose, not your manservant or your woman servant. Right? No, this is not.
So you can all urinate on your wife.
Well, that's what we are. I don't know where to go for that. I don't know. Yeah,
sorry.
I'll try to. Yeah, we'll see if we can add that one out. I don't know. I hate you.
In my defense, you should have made that.
That's
brought that up before.
I
embrace that.
That's okay. Thought we were all not like in 6th grade anymore, Jake, and that we could talk about these things.
Junior higher hiding right under the surface. And it doesn't take much to bring him out.
I wasn't the only one that thought of that.
I'm just saying.
It's the only one that said it.
And so, you know, one of the interesting things I think that we see in our modern day culture, you know, this whole thing here a year or two ago with Harvey Weinstein, right? And this hashtag Me Too, right? And again, there shouldn't be any woman or man that should be pressured into doing anything that they don't want to do. But the same thing, you go, where does that idea come from?
Yeah.
Where does that idea go, well, I shouldn't be used and abused by somebody in a position of power? Where does that ethic come from? Where does that idea... and so it's interesting, again, I think as we do move into, unfortunately, probably a more post-Christendom culture, there's still these ideas. I mean, look at the whole, right, the fairness and the equality. You're like, well, says who?
Yeah. Right.
Says you? Or is there something outside of us that says, no, I have created everyone equal? And
which is kind of interesting. You go to other countries where there is significant, where there's a class system that still exists, and there's lots of countries throughout the world where this still exists.
Yeah.
And those who are on top have the freedom, based on how their system is set up, to abuse those that are on the bottom.
Yeah.
That's part of the class system and the freedom and the privilege that comes with being at the top.
Yep.
And then you look at the religious structure of those countries, largely not across the board, but how is their country kind of built up from a religious standpoint? And you go, oh, well, that's why that exists, because there is no sense of we shouldn't be doing this to one another.
Yeah.
Because that's not the way that they view the world. That's not how they view God. That's not how they think others should be treated. It is very much of get what's yours.
Yeah.
And if you can't get what's yours, somebody's going to take what you've got.
Which again, in our shift to post-Christendom, the truth is our culture, our country, the United States, is becoming more reflective of that.
Yeah.
There was a time when I think there was a greater bit of morality that was built into the socioeconomic structures in our country that are deteriorating right now because we have moved away from, or we've begun rejecting some of those values that place innate value in each person, and that's even when you look at the language of the founding fathers, or the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And all that. That was a way of saying everybody has equal value, right? You have the right to life, you have the right to your freedom, and the right to pursue happiness. Meaning not one of you has any less value. Now, whether they meant, they clearly didn't say, but in the image of God and all of those things, isn't neither here nor there. It was built upon this idea that everybody had the same value.
Yeah.
When we begin to lose that, and we don't see that value in one another, then you can do what Hitler did. You can do what Stalin did. You can do what Mao Zedong did.
And I think I think what we see happen in our culture right now, where this is getting mixed up, is that the equality of opportunity is equated with the equality of outcome. And we've been selling sweet corn for the last week. I have 3 of my kids that have done work picking corn and sitting out at the stand, and one of my children has literally, because my one oldest, my daughter has tallied everything, has kept track of how many ears they've picked and who's worked how many, to the minute.
Definitely a firstborn.
Definitely a firstborn.
Right.
And so my thirdborn, my second son, who quite literally has picked like 1% of the amount of ears of corn that were sold, thinks that he should get some sort of the equality of the outcome. She's like, I'm cutting you in at 5%. I should probably really only cut you in at 1%, but I've cut you in at 5%. And so it's that whole, and it's the same thing. He's been very upset about it. But you go, you had the equal opportunity. You had every opportunity to go out and pick corn. You knew every time a car pulled in, right? You knew your sister was sitting out there. You could have sat out there with her, but you chose not to. And again, I understand age difference, maturity difference. But that's going on right now. I'm going, well, and I do understand. That there are, unfortunately, right, there are some barriers for opportunity. There certainly are. I still think we're the best country face of the planet, but that's a whole nother. But there's this idea that there should be equal outcome, and you go, that's just not, that's the parable of the talents, right? The 5, the 2, and the 1, and it's the guy that works really hard with the 5 that gets the extras. It's not the guy in the middle to make things more equitable, right? The person that goes and gets it can go and get it, And again,
now, to create some tension in this conversation,
I understand.
The difficulty is, and again, I think this is a misapplication of what Jesus is wanting to talk about, is the parable of the vineyard owner who goes out and collects workers, and then he goes back to the marketplace and collects more, and collect more. I think Jesus is doing something different. There's a different thing that he's wanting to talk about and teach with that story as opposed to the talents.
Sure. Yeah,
but that becomes problematic if you just look at the 2 stories and go, well, wait a minute, these are 2 opposing viewpoints and you can't hold it, so it's all garbage, you just throw it all in the trash. Okay, though, that's not wise.
Yeah, because Matthew 20, so again, as we use ashes to ashes and dust to dust out of Ecclesiastes there, Matthew 20 is that 11th hour, right? We talked about that 11th hour, right? The Jewish workday was 12 hours. And again, that's more of a parable of an eternal picture, that there are going to be people in heaven who, well, they just made a deathbed confession. Thank God.
Right.
I don't care if it was with their last breath. Thank God that they gave. Right. I don't know. But again, there are people that, like in that story, that wrinkle their nose up at it and go. I think there'll be a rude awakening for a lot of people. Get to heaven and be like, well, where's my pool? Mm-hmm. Where's my? You get to empty this trash can for eternity. But you're here. Thank God that you're. Sorry, we're getting far.
My wife. This will be a sidebar. My wife has a joke. I don't care much about animals, pets or otherwise, and my wife continues to tell me that part of my, she doesn't use this word, but what she's saying is part of my punishment in heaven is that I get to be a zookeeper. I'm not sure how theologically sound that is, but it sure is mean that she would think that.
She just still said she doesn't get to have cows now.
That's right. Yes. Okay.
So no, that's and then again, I think just continuing this idea of equality, just the idea of slavery, and that has unfortunately, it's just been a part of human history. Mm-hmm. And I think, to me, this is where I think this is the interesting. I think as you talk about a Christian ethic versus a humanistic ethic, because I hear, at least on that side of the humanistic thing, well, everybody's just innately good, everybody, and you're like, really, because again, right? I mean, easy to put Hitler and Stalin as your poster children for, well, then, why did they do anything wrong then? With that viewpoint that, hey, they just do whatever you want. But with the idea of slavery, though, we see that there is an ethic, right? I mean, Paul even addresses this, right? Like, hey, if you do have slaves, they should be treated as a member of the household. And there is an interesting thing there that, is that in Ephesians? Is that Ephesians 5 and 6 there, I think where he gets into that? I mean, and it is laid out like you would see a Roman household code that is laid out, right? The children are supposed to act this way. The husbands, you're supposed to act this way to your wives, right? This is how you're supposed to act to your slaves. And again, we come back to the ethic, and I think of capitalism, where you go, you may own a business. I think we just have much more polite forms of slavery now. But it's the same thing, right? If I'm a business owner, right, and you have people working for you, well, they're just showing up to get a paycheck. Well, but they're making your business go too, right? Mm-hmm. I hope that you're, in some sense, right, that they are like family. And to me, and I think that's where you see businesses that do succeed, right? Because you see somebody who's leading that business with a good, by and large, with a good ethic, treating their employees well, having people excited to show up and go to work every day.
Yeah.
And again, where does that ethic come from, right? Where do you.
Yeah, we should be the best employers, right? This is one of the conversations I've had at a pastoral level, or leading, our church board and things in the past. There are sometimes we want to approach pastoral support with the attitude of, well, what did I get when I was in somebody else's employ, right? Oh, and I was only given X, Y, and Z, so therefore you only should get X, Y, and Z, because I never had more than that, And so to kind of turn the tables there and say, wait a second, wouldn't you have also liked to have had these other things, right? And how much better off would you have been if you had? So shouldn't we be setting the standard, setting the example, and being the best employers? And so then, not just as the church employees, that's clergy, but also as people who are business owners, managers, whatever, in businesses. I mean, there's a local business around here, a manufacturing business in our area that is run by a Christian family who is well known in this community for how they care for their staff. And it's one of those businesses where if you can get in, if you can get your foot in the door there, you never leave.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, and there's working with people who are in poverty in our community. I've watched them get jobs in manufacturing, and they work and they get burnout because they're treated like they're a dime a dozen, and then they move on. But if you can get your foot into the door in that place, you never leave, because
and you don't never leave. That's bad grammar. You stay. You stay, not because it's easy work, because it's hard work. But the way that you are treated. See, people, you were walking around a really good point there. people will do hard work if they are treated well.
Yeah.
But if they are not treated well, they won't even do easy work. They'll go and treat me like garbage.
Yeah.
This isn't even that hard, but I'm not staying here because of you. You don't treat me well, so I'm out. But people will do hard things when they are treated well and honored and respected.
Yeah.
But back to the question, where does that come from?
Yeah.
Where did that begin? How did we go, this is how we need to treat one another. This is how we need to talk to and about other people.
Well, and again, I think with that whole sentence, right, it's a Christian business owner, right? They're a Christian first, not a business owner first, right? I'm a Christian first. Right. And so, and again, and this is like this debate between Tom Holland and A.C. Grayling. You know, A.C. kind of points out some of these different places in history where, you know, the Christians were just buttholes, for lack of a better word.
The Crusades, you mean?
Well, he did not that specifically, but and you go, but you know what? Sometimes we don't always get it right. You know, we just don't. And to me, I think that's where that self-correction comes in. Though, is you go, oh yeah, I'm not really acting very Christ-like.
Right. Yes.
You know, need to free our slaves, right? We need to treat women better.
Yeah.
Right. Need to not.
And that's a thing, you know. In Scripture, there are these things that show up, like slavery, polygamy, women's rights, all those kinds of things, right? And there's a consistent movement in them from the Old Testament, antiquity, to how they're understood in light of the church and Christ. You know, so it's slave. So if you're going to have slaves, here's how you treat them. And people look at that and impose a 21st century hermeneutic on there and say, well, how they were allowing slavery? How could you? You don't understand. To go in and say free all slaves would have not resonated, and the point would have been lost. To say if you're going to have them, here's how you treat them. Right? When Paul talks to Timothy about how it is women should learn and how they should conduct themselves in church. People look at that today and wow, they were leading to the oppression of women. You missed the operative verb there. How they should learn. That was one of the first times in history, especially in that place, that women were given the permission to learn.
Yes.
And they can't teach if they haven't first learned. So it was the stepping stone. I mean, so there's these movements in Scripture where we see those things taking shape, and then by the time, you know, our culture is built, those values are in full swing.
Sure. So one of the things that is in danger when we talk about something that is historical and ancient and talk about something that is current and now is that we don't impose current and now into something that is ancient and historical. We have to be careful. We hold those two in hands that are open so that one can inform the other and we can understand historically what was going on back here so that we can then properly interpret and apply to what happened here to now.
Because, I mean, I think it's even in the Judeo ethic. I mean, that was the idea that Abraham and Moses, right, were to set up and lead some sort of nation, right, that would be a light to all nations, right? That this is how you are going to treat your slaves. This is how you are going to conduct yourselves. This is how you are going to reset everything economically every 50 years. Well, there's a concept. You know, sorry, get us, what?
Jubilee.
Yeah, Jubilee.
I
right?
love the idea.
Yeah.
I mean...
So again, it just you know, and again, ultimately, right, his point of just being, how is it that this crucified criminal, right, really just permeates this culture that we all. He uses an analogy where he says, you know, it's like the fish swimming in the fishbowl, like that Christendom is that water that you're swimming in that you don't even know. And so for me, I think it's a lot of even people say, well, I'm an atheist. Yeah, but you still have an ethic that you operate by that, whether you want to acknowledge it or not, is rooted in a Judeo-Christian ethic. It just is. And again, I know some people probably tearing their hair out and bashing.
It's kind of funny though.
Head into a keyboard, but you know, it's like it is, because what other ethic is it then?
It's kind of funny to me how there are some ethics in history or some movements in history that are so set on divorcing themselves from all faith that lean the most heavily upon Judeo-Christian ethic, right? So it is what it is. But I think one of the things to that point about how it is that one of the things that we see in Christ, that we see in the crucifixion, that we see in the church, is God. He doesn't move through the rich and powerful, right? I mean, and doesn't mean the rich and powerful don't have a relation with God. But what I mean is, when you look at how he moves, in history, he uses the least. Yeah. He uses the subversive. He does things behind the scenes that you don't even notice are happening around you.
Right.
And that's how this crucified criminal or itinerant preacher who dies a criminal's death. That's how it changes the course of history because it isn't flashy, right? Because it isn't a big to-do. It is this constant subversive, behind-the-scenes, subliminal movement that is always altering the trajectory of human history. Yeah,
and that's what we'll get too far afield here, but say you see in some of those early Roman historical writings that some of the Caesars and things write these Christians who hold to this strange superstition, which talk about the resurrection, of going, they don't believe that he actually died. And right, so there is a hope, right? There is. Yeah, I think you said before we started recording the idea of, there were obviously outbreaks of persecution against the church. Some of them horrible, some of those horrible ones during Nero's time, but some of those getting to a point where it wasn't politically expedient of going, we need to stop this, right? This is so. Why do you have this group of people that don't care, but are not fighting back, or are letting us crucify them, or letting because they believe in something bigger than them, right? They believe life after death. They believe resurrection. So I don't know. To me, the book, I'm excited to continue reading it and getting it finished. I think it's again just how much the Christian culture really does permeate. I think how everybody really does conduct themselves, how they think, how they feel, whether they realize it or not. Tom Holland, he had a thing. He said humanism. He said it's kind of a soft, godless Protestantism. So I don't know. I thought, that's about right. So I don't know. It like I said, we'll have that link to the Tom Holland and A.C. Grayling debate, a little over an hour long. If this discussion has interested you in any way, that would be something to a little bit deeper level than what we went into. But any closing thoughts, or
I don't think
we're good? All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks for tuning in and watching. We appreciate it, and hope that you are blessed and have a great day.